Ordinance to amend the Code of Sussex County, Chapter 72, Article 2, Sections 72-16 through 72-28, and Chapter 115, Articles 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Sections 115 through 120, 115-20, 115-25, 29, 34, 37, 42, 45, 50, 53, 58, regarding affordably priced rental units and the Sussex County Rental Unit Program.
And Mr. Chairman, while Mr. Robertson is just getting set up to confirm that the ordinance has been noticed and is posted on our website, we have received one comment raising comments, and that comment letter has been circulated. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to come down here because it's easier for one of these ordinances to sort of go through it and explain it. And we have a PowerPoint, Mr. Whitehouse, if you could run that. And I'm here with Brandy Nauman. She runs our Community Development and Housing office within Sussex County. So, Jamie, if you could flip it to the first page of the PowerPoint. So, this really originated back in 2018 with the 2018 Comprehensive Land Use Plan. There was a lot of input related to the lack of affordable workforce housing in Sussex County. And that's referenced, and I'm not going to go through it, but if you look at the ordinance and all the whereas clauses, the basis for this initiative, are cited in there. I am going to hit a couple of them. There was a housing vision. I'm not going to state that, but it supports it. The comp plan recognized in 2018 that there was an influx of new residents in Sussex County, which fueled prosperity in the county's real estate market, hospitality industry, and fueled prosperity, and related economic sectors. I can get my mouth to work right now. Yet most housing, particularly on the eastern side of the county, is new and often unaffordable to low-income families, seasonal employees, entry-level workers, and recent college graduates. And it also recognized that the shortage of affordable housing remains a very real problem for low to moderate income households in Sussex County. One of the other objectives, or a couple of objectives talked about within that housing element, the need to improve the county's rental program, the SCRP program, to provide incentives to properly reflect the housing market and incentivize developers to participate in the provision of affordable housing. One of the strategies talked about explore ways for private developers to provide multifamily and affordable housing opportunities in Sussex County. And then there were several objectives and strategies that talked about facilitating and promoting land use policies that enable and increase in the supply of affordable housing in areas with adequate infrastructure, increase affordable housing options, including the supply of rental units near employment opportunities, reviewing county code to determine if there are regulatory barriers to development of affordable housing, to revisit the zoning code to determine in districts where multifamily housing is currently a conditional use, if it should be made a permitted use, if water and sewer are already present and available to the site. And there's others in the housing element. So that was sort of the initial startup for this in 2018. And then as it says up there, Brandy's office, following the directives of the comp plan, developed an RFP for a housing consultant to provide recommendations for Sussex County. In April of 2019, the county contracted with LSA to do a housing needs and market analysis, economic feasibility analysis, housing opportunity, and market evaluation. One of the things, we had that in the comp plan, but that was sort of, a broad topic, and I think, folks understand that we need to address the affordable housing, increase affordable housing and workforce housing opportunities in Sussex County. I would say it this way: it's one thing to talk about that. It's another thing to figure out a way that actually works. Works for the county, works for the future residents, and works for the people who are going to build these. Which I'll get into in a moment. We have a rental unit program in Sussex County currently, the SCRP program. Back when that was done, we didn't do a study, and that was 2008 or 9. But there were incentives built in. There was incentives in terms of expediting your application, bonus density, and that sort of thing. It's 2022, so 14 years, we've had one that's utilized that program. And frankly, the feedback we got was that It was either economically unviable, it was too clunky, for lack of a better word, in the process, and just nobody utilized it. So we had to figure out why that was the case. Why wasn't this working, and not make the same mistake twice, frankly, and come up with another program that's not based on expert opinions and facts that tell us that A, we'll be able to supply workforce and affordable housing, and B, that we'll be able to partner with the development community in a way that's economically viable to do that. And there's elements to that. In the LSA report, we look at, the cost throughout the county, and then they talked with people who were involved in this, engaged in this process, from the public sector to the private sector to the housing sector, and certainly with county staff. I mean, there's a lot of different variables that go into that. There's the land use cost, which is more obviously on the coastal side of the county than on the western side of the county. But the flip side of that is the rents are higher, market rate rents are higher on the coastal side of the county than they are on the western side of the county. Meanwhile, the fixed costs are essentially the same. The construction costs are the same both sides of the county. So, and that's sort of an oversimplification, but the math of that is you have to have enough density, so I think the LSA calls it like cross-subsidizing or something like that, where the market rate units, and you have enough of those to make the affordable workforce housing units viable. And when you have lower property values on the western side of the county and lower rents on the western side of the county for market rate units, it gets it tough to do it over there. And, same thing on the eastern side where you have higher, you kind of flip that around, you have the higher rents, but you also have the higher land use. So what LSA determined, and that report's on our website, and I think you all have copies of it, I know I forwarded that to you all, was that to make this one right there, to make this work, the number is 12 units an acre. And so that's what we came up with. And jumping back now to the ordinance, that LSA report talked about that specifically. And one of the things they said was that we should modify the zoning code to promote housing affordability in the growth areas identified in the comprehensive plan, including the allowance for a maximum density of 12 units per acre by right where affordable units are provided. Sort of based on all that, and then based on our experience doing the one SCRP project, which was Coastal Tide, which I think you all are familiar with. That's the ones behind Home Depot in the Lewis area. What we did is sort of two things with this ordinance that's before you tonight. One is we took Chapter 72, which is the SCRP existing provisions in our code, and we streamlined it. And by that, and Brandy can chime in at any time, but the way that, and let me back up, Coastal Tide was a good test case. Obviously it was built and we had real life tenants going in there. We had a really good property manager that was working with a developer that was working well with Brandy's office. And so we were working through all these issues, and there was a lot of conversations along the way, well, how can we make this better? One of the things I think we'd all agree on is that the current way that SCRP program is drafted or is in our code, it really almost puts us right there in partnership with the property management folks. I mean, we're right there evaluating tenants. We're right there making sure everything happens with the property. We're almost duplicating. We're becoming a property management agency ourselves when we already have a property management agency that's working for a developer. So we kind of flipped that around and made it so that all those requirements are still in place, but the property manager or the developer has to certify that they're complying with those requirements to us on an annual basis. So there's checks and balances in that, but we're not duplicating. Our staff is not duplicating work that somebody else is already doing. So that's one of the big changes that's in the Chapter 72 of the code. And what it does then is it takes out sort of the bonus densities that were in there and expedited densities and says that if you do this and you provide housing to the qualified individuals, then you are eligible to do the permitted use of 12 units an acre in all the residential districts. Not the HR districts, because you can already go to 12 units there, so it's redundant, nobody would do it, but in the others. That's really what the first part of it does. And Jamie, if you want to flip to the next slide.
That's AR as well?
AR as well. AR as well. And I'm going to get to the requirements of the standards. So there are guardrails on that, for lack of a better word. This, I already kind of went through this. I jumped ahead of the PowerPoint, but these were the recommendations that came out of that LSA report. The one that we're focused on now is strategy number 1, modify the county zoning code to promote housing affordability in growth areas as identified in the comp plan. The local housing trust fund, that's a separate initiative that's underway, happening, yes. And then preserving the existing supply of affordable housing is also something that's ongoing. Yeah. So, Jamie, if you could switch to the next one. So, let me just make sure I haven't skipped anything in Chapter 72. So, as I said, we've added the annual audit requirements, and what that audit has to be prepared by a certified public accountant, CPA, who's not otherwise affiliated with that developer. We want a third-party independent accountant or audit occurring. They have to certify that all of the Chapter 72 requirements and the terms of the SCRP agreement, which is up front with the developer, are being adhered to. They have to confirm the status of each SCRP unit, whether leased or vacant. They have to certify that each of the eligible tenants renting an SCRP unit within the projects are in fact eligible as of the date of the report. They have to certify or provide the status and duration of any vacancy of any SCRP unit. They have to certify the marketing efforts to re-rent any vacant SCRP unit, because we don't want them sitting there vacant. We want to get new families in there as quickly as we can. We want to know the status of any list of eligible tenants awaiting an SCRP unit to come available, and then any other information that either the CPA wants or Brandy's office requires, they would have to provide. So again, that's a fairly all-encompassing audit, but it allows the developer to run their project and do it providing housing to those tenants. It allows Brandy to do her job more efficiently, and then they provide that report so that we know what's happening and nobody's duplicating what anybody else is doing. And we did add a penalty provision in here, because one of the things we don't want is that somebody just sits on an SCRP unit and doesn't rent it or doesn't really try hard to rent it. And so there is a provision in here that if they rent an SCRP unit to somebody at market rate, then they have to essentially pay that rent that they incurred to Sussex County, and it goes into our housing funds with the county. So there is an incentive to rent it and get folks in there. So with regard to the new permitted use for affordable housing, it is a permitted use. So, like we sort of just talked about, it's one of those that you're allowed to do in any of the residential zones. It would be permitted by right in the following growth areas, which are the coastal area, the developing area, and the town center areas, which are shown on that, and you all are familiar with, but that's a copy of our future land use map that's in the 2018 comp plan. So that's sort of the baseline for where these can go. So Jamie, if you want to flip it to the next. So these are some of the standards that we put in place. One of the things we're conscious of is that if there's not standards that apply to making this a permitted use, theoretically it almost does away with zoning completely, because you'd have AR1, but you could put high density everywhere, and then what's the point of having AR, MR, GR, all the different residential zoning classifications. So we wanted to make sure that these projects are going in appropriate locations with appropriate parameters. And I should say, which we'll be able to show, we also ran a test case. Jamie's office got AECOM, if I recall,
correct. Yep.
to take these parameters and see, can you actually do it? We know that the economics of it work from LSA's report, and there's an appendix to that talks about all the economic information that they went through. I'm not going to bore you with that, but to come up with the 12 units in Acre and make sure it works. On the other hand, we didn't want to start something that physically couldn't be built, like wouldn't fit on a piece of property. So we had AECOM do it to make sure that you could fit the 12 units on the acre with these separation requirements, with the parking requirements, with the stormwater management requirements, and determine that can be done as well. So yeah, the design criteria, as I said, at least 30% of the units must be set aside as SCRP units. There has to be a perimeter buffer of 100 feet. The building heights increased to 52 feet and 4 stories. One of the things we wanted to do was, and we looked at this at a prior iteration of this, when you look at a lot of the multifamily or apartment complexes in Sussex County now, because of our height limits, you end up with flat roofs. And frankly, this might be something we look at separately, but we wanted to give an opportunity to have a little more design ingenuity so that you could have a pitched roof these aren't starting to look like barracks like some of them have. So it's 4 stories at 52 feet to give you the ability to put a pitched roof on it. The open space has to be at least 50%. Central water and sewer required. I know we got a couple comments on that. And my response would be, first, LSA said that you have to have central water and sewer. You have to have those central utilities. The other thing is, I suppose you could get away without central water, but I don't know that this would work without central sewer, just because, yeah, you need sewer, and you'd have to have so much land to have a big enough drain field,
That's right.
for all those units with that density. So, I understand that there was a concern that limited geographically where it could go, but I think that's one of those design requirements that's essential to making this work. If there's a commercially zoned property adjacent, you have to have interconnectivity to it. Ms. Stevenson will be happy with that.
The only thing you could potentially do is if you wanted to make an exception for small projects, you could say anything over 20 units, 40 units. I mean, if somebody wants to do a small project,
Right.
I don't know if that's even feasible, but.
Yeah, I know, and that's a good point. I sort of back to relying on the experts. I would just say if we're going to consider that, maybe get Mr. Medlars' opinion on that.
Generally,
I just don't know.
If apartment projects are worth the trip, they're usually in the 100, 120.
But I don't know. I went to the low-income housing symposium thing they had last week, and there was a company there that was I think they were a nonprofit out of Salisbury that wants to do this kind of stuff. So maybe they would be interested in a smaller scale if they could afford it.
That's what I'm saying. There might be an exception maybe for a small project.
Well, we can certainly. I'll make a note of that. And
It's worth looking into. Just investigate it maybe.
I'm guessing if they have sewer and water available, that's going to be more likely where they're going to have a dart route too.
Right. And
So that would all tie in
there's a
with
lot of
that.
things that
Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, that would then
Agree,
tie that.
yeah.
Right. And so there's the other one, sidewalks in all streets and interconnectivity with the surrounding sidewalk systems. Walking and biking trails required to be interconnected, and they are permitted in that 100 feet of perimeter separation or buffer. The primary view sheds on all units should be directed to open spaces and amenities. That was more of a design requirement, just so, we didn't want these all to be, just sort of crammed in, that they were all looking at. It almost comes down to superiority design requirements we have for cluster subdivisions. That was sort of their origins for that. And then the next one was located near DART or a planned DART route. One of the reasons for that is, we want these to be theoretically near employment centers or that folks have access to transportation to employment centers. And we looked at, I think, Jamie, the next slide is the DART slide. Maybe not. Is it? You want to go one more? Maybe. Yeah, there we go. So that's the current DART system. And what we looked at for the dimensions for how close it has to be, it's a half mile in the current ordinance. And I believe there was a justification for that dimension.
Correct. There's guidance from the Federal Highway Administration as to what is deemed to be walkable, and then beyond that, if you have a bicycle, it can be even greater than that. But we based it upon what you can physically walk without a bicycle. So.
And anecdotally, I think Mr. Whitehouse or somebody mentioned that we heard from DART. I don't know if it was formally or informally, but they were kind of excited by that too, because then it would drive ridership, for their system as well. So anyhow, that's the current DART route. It's existing DART routes, or if it's on the drawing board for expansion as well. Jamie, if you want to flip back to the prior one real quick. So the housing requirements, as I mentioned, it's multifamily designation and rental units only. It's not home ownership. That's a separate Sussex County plan that we're going to hope to tackle separately. We have one of those now. But that's because that's home ownership. You don't have a property manager or developer running a project, an apartment with market rate and SCRP units. It gets a little tougher. Habitat for Humanity, I know Mr. Gilmore's here. They do a really good job with that, with their home ownership system and mortgages they place on the property. But anyhow, that's a different situation, home ownership, that we're not talking about today. At least 30% restricted units that average annually 80% of AMI or less. As I mentioned, there has to be compliance reporting based on submitted audits and certifications we talked about. And then there's those financial penalties we talked about if they violate it. So, Jamie, if you want to flip to the next one. Yeah, and then the next one. So these were the designs we did, or Jamie did, or actually AECOM did through Jamie's oversight.
Could you just go back to that again, that it was 30% of what? At least 30% restricted
30 restricted
units.
of the project need to be restricted units, and they have to be average 80% of AMI or less.
And what's the 12.5% that's in the
Is that
application?
30% of the 12.5?
Okay.
The 12.5 is what it currently was in the SCRP program. That's
Okay,
what we're
so
getting rid
everything
of.
that's in red is stuff that's going out?
Right, well, yeah, and this is, I'll back up.
Okay.
State
Apparently I was
law.
way messed up reading this.
Yeah,
so.
no, well, so here's what I'll take it a step, I'm going to dial it back here a second, because the way the state statute requires us to do ordinances is that if you're deleting anything, it has to be in brackets. And if you're adding anything, it has to be underlined in italics, which is really hard to follow if you're going through a black and white document, particularly finding where the brackets start and where the brackets end. On that first part in Chapter 72, we tried to highlight anywhere there was a change in red, just so you could go to that right away. But what's coming out is in brackets, and what's going in is underlined in italics.
So
the 12.5, just to answer that question, that's coming out because that's what's currently in that program, and it's not being used.
So it's going to be 30% units that average 80% of AMI, and AMI is the,
Average median income.
Yeah, I'm going to ask.
okay, that's
the
fine,
expert
average
to
median
explain
income. Now, but in your thing, you're saying here moderate to low income, and you define that in your ordinance to be 30% to 80%.
Right, so the percentages get a little bit
Well,
confusing.
okay, so 30% to 80%. But here's my question then. If you have to be 30% of 80%, how does that play into the big picture of all the folks because almost half of our workforce, as the study shows, and we'll get into that later, is actually considerably under the 80%.
So, right, so actually the number 2 means that we are required, in order to receive the permitted use, 30% of your total project must be held as affordable units. That's that 30%. So 30 out of 100 units must be affordable, for example. And then of those 30 units, they must serve a population that is 80% of the area median income or less. So there's a lot of percentages going on, and I apologize. But yeah, the set aside of affordable units would be 30% of your project, and then they must house folks that earn 80% of the area median income or less. So that is what we consider moderate or low income.
Right, which is a pretty big chunk of the workforce,
is,
too.
yeah.
What is
It used
that
to be
in, what is that
70%,
in
didn't
real
it?
income
Increase.
numbers
Actual
today?
income. Do you
Yeah.
happen to have that, Jamie? I'm sorry.
Average median
What's
income right now.
the acronym mean again, AMI?
Area median income. And
Area
it is
So it's right in the middle, not the
right.
average.
So it is for
Area.
Sussex
Area.
County.
Area.
And, yeah. And they don't differentiate between the east and the west side of the county, but it is county specific.
This one, yep.
Yes, thank
Yep.
you, Jamie. So I'm sorry, I wanted to, hopefully this makes it a little bit more clear. So that 30-80% can be visualized here. So for a household of two, the low end would be $18,030 earned annually, and the maximum would be $48,100 earned annually. And the rents listed there below are what we are currently charging at Coastal Tide, and so that was what was proposed in this ordinance as well. A one-bedroom is $590 under the program, $705 for the two-bedroom, and the three-bedroom is $815. I will say that the 2022 income limits did just come out this past week, so we will be updating these, and they did go. Incomes went up a little bit, actually, surprisingly, given all that's going on. But so we can provide some updated figures too. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of what the range is. A family of four can earn less than $60,100.
Thank
Hope
you.
that helps clarify.
Yeah, no, it's, when you go percentages, I
know.
kind of go.
It is, it's-
But when you
it's a
say,
lot.
okay, if you're making this
Yes.
much, then it's this much. That's what I need to, that works for me.
So Jamie, if you want to flip then to the plan, just, and, this was a sort of a stickman site plan, that we just wanted to make sure that geometrically, we could do what it is we set out to do on a plan using those parameters. So Jamie, if you just want to explain what this shows.
So we had to make certain assumptions, but we wanted to see that it works on a 10-acre parcel, and then we wanted to see that the same math can be applied and it can be designed on a much larger parcel. So for the 10-acre parcel, we assumed 1,000 square feet per unit, 4-floor building, 4 units per floor. So you can see in that bottom right-hand corner, you can see some of the assumptions on the building shape and the dimensions, and that gave us certain assumptions on the number of units per building. We were able to work with the 100-foot setback. So you can see here that it's an intersection, and we were able to not only meet those requirements numerically and the parking and the setbacks and make assumptions for stormwater as well, but with this 10-acre parcel, we were even able to design at 12 dwelling units to the acre for 120 units and get a community building on there as well. So it shows that there is flexibility in the model, is workable at 10 acres. The comments that came back, though, is that parking and having flexibility on parking is important in getting the arrangement of buildings to work. And then if we move to the 30-acre model, the same principles, same design assumptions, that we were able to assume 8 units per floor for 1,000 square feet per unit across 4 floors. So that gives us 30 units per building in this particular model. So you see the larger, wider multifamily buildings being built at 4 stories. Again, assuming 12 dwelling units to the acre, it gave us 360 dwelling units, and then it allowed us to break it down and how you can achieve 72 units. So 30% of that unit is 72 workforce housing units, and even with those same design criteria and scaling it all up, we assume for a slightly non-irregular parcel, so we wanted to see that, not every parcel is a rectangle, so we gave them an irregular shape. We even started to consider things like stormwater management at the rear, or even the potential for wetlands, for example. But again, it came back, it was viable physically in terms of its design, its layout. Interconnectivity here worked just fine. Again, we were able to get a community building in the front, complying with setbacks, and all the design criteria could be met, and the unit numbers met also, without significant compromise, with room left over in this model. So
Is there a minimum size lot, or is it just anybody who can fit it in can go with it?
So there is nothing in the ordinance that specifically says you have to be 10 acres or 30 acres. We just chose those numbers for modelling purposes. So.
And those are illustrative, but just know that, they were scaled. When we did the exercise, it was all scaled, we just didn't clutter up those drawings to show all
Like
those
devil's
dimensions.
advocate here, should there have been storage buildings considered in, is that normally included with the affordable housing?
We didn't consider it, because, well, and I'll tell you why.
It was
because-
mentioned earlier, just.
Yeah, no, and we looked at, several other projects, which is in that other PowerPoint, when we went through one of these with council. And most of the rentals, some of them do. Like, I know we had one that came through here a while back out your way.
Yep.
But a lot of them don't have separate storage units. They're either
I
integrated
don't
into
know
the
why it
unit
would be
itself.
necessary if you're
Yeah.
So
housing.
if the current ordinance is 12 to the acre, why would developers be interested to do this at 12 to the acre if they've got to sacrifice 30%? Now, currently, they only have to sacrifice 12%. but now this percentage is going up.
Here's why, and it's an easy answer, it's permitted. It's permitted. So there's not a public hearing before you all, there's not a public hearing before county council.
They go straight to site plan.
Straight to site plan.
That's great.
And you think about it,
So they can do that anywhere in the county?
as long as it meets those criteria.
As long as they're half a mile from the bus stop?
Right, yep. Well, you know, it's central water and sewer,
And all the
and
other
developing
stuff.
areas, right there.
So
that are-
like, let's take Robinsonville Road, where we had, the development that's going on down there. As long as there's a bus stop within a half a mile, do those locations meet?
Well, I don't know about specific locations, but, the DART route's one of those, and I don't think there's a DART route on Robinsonville Road. Because when you look at the DART routes, that's a real limiting factor.
You get a dart.
It would be,
Who controls getting the dart route?
the state does. The DART
So
does.
if you could get the dart route, then they could potentially put,
They may expand their routes if they have opportunity,
Yeah,
I would
right,
hope.
right.
I would hope they would.
Right. I mean, right now, it's pretty much Route 9, 24, I don't know if it's 54 and 26 off the top of my head.
So-
1 and 113.
If a developer could secure a commitment for DART to extend the route to within a half a mile of a site, would that qualify, or does it have to be an existing route?
It has to be an existing route at the time of, we award it. I want to make sure I get this right.
Because,
Yeah, no, it's the final site plan approval, again, this is what I thought, I just want to make sure I was correct in this. The final site plan approval shall not be granted until the route is in existence and operated by DART. So, you can get preliminary all you want, but you're not going to get final until that's actually physically in existence.
so let me, if we go to the report, and I made a copy of, not the entire report, the report's like 80 pages, but I wanted to comment on maybe up to page 20 or something like that, 20-something, so.
Well, let me back up, because, your point's a fair one, Mr.
Because I
Hopkins.
want to drill into that a little bit more.
Okay. We don't have LSA here, so I can't speak for them, but one of the things that I go back to your point about Robinsonville Road, and I don't think that meets the criteria because there's not a DART route there, but right now we have a well-established acknowledgement that we don't have good affordable housing in Sussex County. And not good, I don't want to say that. We don't have enough affordable housing, or workforce housing in Sussex County. We looked at ways to achieve that. Sussex County itself does not have, we don't own housing developments. We don't build them, we don't own them, we don't develop them. And so one of the things that we've talked about as a county, and a whole variety of things, is public-private partnerships. This isn't quite that because we're not going to own anything. But what can we do, and this is what the LSA report talks about, what can be done to get affordable housing that is not being built today in Sussex County? That's why we commissioned this report, because everybody knows we need it, and what's the way we're going to get it? And the only way we're going to get it, unless somebody comes up with a better idea, is through density like this and make it a permitted use. Because everybody wants it, let's be honest. But if we have a public hearing, there's arguments about density, and it puts everybody in the spot, and there's no predictability or certainty, and it takes time to get through that gauntlet of approvals.
So everybody who doesn't live here wants it, and everybody in government wants it, but the people who lived here don't necessarily want it, based on, let's just be realistic. If they could complain, they would. I can't get people to say, people are complaining because I say, could you connect to the next thing? We don't want those people driving through our yard.
Well, at some point, I got some questions. So
Yeah, no,
I don't mean to cut you, and
Yeah.
we'll just, keep going.
I
Keep going.
would just say, based on the
Yeah.
data we've gotten, and
Yeah.
I've heard, I disagree with that, because, when you talk to folks, I know Brandy's talked to people at Cape Henlopen School District, they can't get teachers. 'Cause
Oh,
they
I
can't
agree.
afford to
No,
live there.
I get you,
Yeah.
but that's not these
Yeah.
people.
I misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah.
I think. Okay, yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
that concludes, I think, our presentation, so, yeah. Mr.
Well,
Hopkins.
I agree with you 100%, Vince, that we have a problem. The problem is not just a train wreck about to happen; it's a tsunami. And the report, which I think is well written, and I only generated like 20 pages, but I would strongly encourage y'all to read the whole report. And it clearly shows that half of our workforce can't afford a $250,000 house, and that's the upper half of that half. I'm kind of going to jump around on you a little bit here. The ordinance, the report, I called it a report, I'm sorry, it's actually an evaluation. The evaluation talks about both ownership as well as rental.
Right.
Now, the only reference that I see in the ordinance is just the word, the housing thing, but this is 100% rental.
It's totally rental,
This is
yeah.
rental.
Because we have a totally separate moderately placed housing unit section of our code, and that is because here's the thing: when you have home ownership, you have to be really careful that investors don't buy those properties and flip them or whatever, and it really makes us become the I don't know the keeper of making sure that those homeowner occupied properties remain that way in perpetuity. So we need to tackle that, but we're tackling this now.
That's something different.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to try for us to be able to get our arms around, brain around, is how many and how long. How many do we need? And they range from 30 to 80. If the way it's written, we're only peeling off everybody that just falls under the 80. What about everybody else? Like if you look at page 2 of the evaluation, if I could maybe kind of digress just for a second, this table at the bottom of page 2. The only problem that I have, and I'm just a novelist at all this stuff, with the report, with the evaluation, is the fact they had to work off the consortium numbers, and is that how you say it? Consortium. So the consortium, they're projecting. You can see it on page 2, and you can also see it over here if you flip over to page 14. Page 14 shows you, I'm sorry, 13. Page 13 shows you the projection on that table. It shows you the projection of between 2020 and 2030. And they're saying that new houses, like new permits, over that 10-year period is going to be 10,290. And then between 2030 and 2040, another 5,000. Well, in 3 years, we pretty much hit close to that 15,000 number, right, Jamie?
Based on that math.
But is
I'm
that
talking about actual permits that you've issued. I know last year it was 5,200 some, right?
So if you count county-wide, that number includes in-town and out-of-town, i.e. all permits that come through the county. But you're right, if you total everything up Sussex County, not just unincorporated areas, it's probably approximately 5,000 a year.
5,000 a year.
This is a question I'm never sure of. Is that all building permits? Like, so if somebody builds a deck, or is that new house starts?
That's all single-family manufactured homes and multifamily.
Decks are a different category.
Correct.
So then how many do we have approved?
It's all dwelling units.
Okay.
Correct.
I just didn't know if you lumped all building.
So my point is that and this is a little bit of a sore spot for those of us that were involved in those 30-some meetings back in 17 and 18 when we believed that the consortiums, you have to correct me every time I say that.
We got
Consortium, math, we knew it was way off the charts. And, another consultant came in and it was back and forth but anyway, here we are, only 3 years later, and we've burned up 20 years worth of what they said we were going to do. So, with that being said, if we go back to this table on the front, on page 2, where it says, Kim, would you mind just reading this paragraph right here? Because you read so much faster. On page 2. Can you
Page 2, the one that starts with
right.
however? Yeah, okay. However, Sussex County has not seen construction of new homes at rents and prices that are affordable to lower-income households, including individuals in key sectors of the local economy and individuals living on fixed incomes. Currently, there are nearly 10,700 households in Sussex County that are severely cost-burdened, spending more than half of their income on housing each month. Man, that's awful. To help mitigate current and future housing challenges, support economic growth, and promote a high quality of life for county residents, Sussex County should encourage the production of rental and for-sale homes affordable to households in different income ranges as follows.
Now, the as follows, they have, just like we did, they have to work off the consortium's table, their basis. So so this is what the consortium had come up with. Okay, so what they're saying is 100% AM or 80 to 100% and lower. So you take the less than 30, the 30 to 50, to 50 to 80. Those numbers right there, which are your ordinances, what you refer to as median and low categories. If you take those three numbers, the 99, the 131, and the 171, is what they're saying every year we should be building in order just to keep up with the demand, not to touch this 10,700 households up in the paragraph that Kim just read. But we need to be generating 401 based on the total units of 1549. Now, we know that last year the total units was not 1549, it was 5,200, and it was pretty much the same the year before and the year before. So this baby's rolling. You would think that these numbers are going to increase as well. But let's just use these numbers. Let's just use the 80% and lower. That's 401 units every year that we need to be coming up with somewhere. So to me, that's the first. To me, that's like the first thing that we have to look at. We have to cue in on the fact that, okay, how big is the problem? And how do we get there? So how do we get there? It's like, how do we get to
jump in, I think this
units?
is a great first step to do what we're doing tonight. I think you guys, I appreciate all the work that's been done, because I think this is a great step. It used to be 70%, now it's 80%. So that number has increased to try to help some of the others that were falling behind.
In 14 years, it was, what, 30 units? That's been coastal
Yeah.
tide.
But I think what you've put in place here and the example that you've given by working with ACOM, I appreciate all of that. It clearly shows it can be done. And the other great part of it is that they don't have to go through a public hearing.
Right.
I mean, it's a no-brainer for anybody to try to do that.
Can we just go to page 20? In the report here, if you take the was almost like the third bullet up or third paragraph up, second bullet up from the bottom, the best case rental scenario, the model becomes viable at 10 units per acre. At 12 units per acre, the project could support a 25% set aside of units. Affordable to households earning 80% or below. Okay? So this analysis is already proven the ordinance wrong, it seems like to me, because you're saying that you want to do 12 units to the acre and set aside 35%, but that's in opposition
No,
to...
so what we did, no, it's not at all, Mr. Hopkins. It says, this is in the best case rental scenario, the coastal model, at 12 units an acre, the project could support a 25% set aside of units affordable to households earning 80%. I'll tell you, we took it a step further. We wanted to shoot a little bit higher and go for 30. We wanted more affordable units out of that 12. If we're going to be allowing a permitted buyer rate, 12 units an acre, we ought to get something back in return. It's a lot easier to start at 30 and back it down to something else than to start at 25 and go up to a higher number.
Well, the next sentence says, to achieve this level of housing affordable to 50% AMI and below, the project would need at least 16 units per acre.
That's correct, but we're looking at 80. We're trying to capture a wider range of folks, so we want it to be 80 or down.
80 is higher. In other words, 80 is a higher income.
Right.
But we still have a lot of folks in Sussex County, which it says in here, that are at that 80 and lower that can't afford rental and home ownership right now. So we want to capture 80 on down, even below 50.
But in order to capture 80 and lower, you got to pick the lowest number. You have to make provisions for a 30%er is not going to fit in an 80% category. I think you're getting it mixed up.
I mean, and again, this is why we hired someone to do all of the math for us, but that was, my understanding is that those scenarios were all played out as part of their modeling, was the level of incomes that would be able to be achieved, viable at that.
Well, how do you
that
explain
level.
this sentence then? To achieve about this level of housing affordable to 50% AMI and below, the project would need at least 16 units per acre.
That's right, because if you're 50 below, you would be charging lower rental rates.
Even lower, yeah.
And you would need to have more units at market rate to offset that 50%.
So are we trying to help those people, or are we only trying to
Yes.
help the 80%?
Because if you're 80, 70, 60, 50, 30, 40, all the way down.
No, you're not.
Why not? If it's 80 or below,
Yeah.
it's 80 or below. So all that underneath it's encompassed. We're not saying 80 and above.
But as you make provisions for people that make less money, you have to have more units.
No, what this says is if you bring in 80% all the way down, if you bring in 80 and you bring in 30s and you bring in 50s and 60s, you need 12 units an acre at 25%.
That's not right. That's not right. I can tell you that the math, that's just not right.
Well, that's what our
But
experts
that's
told
what this
us.
sentence says. This sentence says if you want to get better than 80, if you want to also help people that are at the 50%
No.
level.
It says, Mr. Hopkins, what it says, if you're trying to just do 50 and below, so you're not capturing 80 to 50, if you're just doing 50 and below and that's it, that's your cutoff, then you would need 16 units an acre.
Four additional units per acre to
If you're
offset
doing
that.
you're only
80
doing 50.
all the way down,
Yeah.
you could do it at 12 and 30. I mean, what we don't want to do is exclude the people that are from 50 to 80 that are the workforce of Sussex
That's
County.
my whole point. That's exactly what you're doing by only building 12. You're only going to meet the 80% people. You're not going to be accommodating the 50% people.
No, that's not correct, Mr. Hopkins, because I don't know how to explain it. If you have 80, then you have 79, 78, 76.
No, you don't, because they don't fit. An 80% of $100 is $80, okay?
Right.
So if you're saying that you need, that you'll let me come live there at $80, if everybody else is paying $100, I'm sliding in just in there at 80. But what happens if I only make 50? Then you're not going to let me in.
Yes,
Yes,
we
we
are.
are.
yes, you are, yeah.
It's 80 and down.
It's 80 and down.
What the issue is, it's 80. So we're not just taking anybody that's 80. If you come in at 50, you're in. If you come in at 60, you're in. If you come in at 70, you're in.
Right. But
It's
if
given a wider range
Yeah.
to be
But
considered.
how does it determine that we get a good mix of it, and somebody's not just saying, okay, you just made the cut at 80, and you just, and like, oh, this one's 30, well, we didn't see that one.
Well, it's an averaging of the,
Yeah.
I think that's what the slide requested, is that there should be an average, so that we hope to have a range of, I think this has come up
Mixed
before you
incomes.
before, that it's very difficult to get
Yeah.
someone that's precisely at 80%. So we want to be able to someone that comes in might be 60, and someone that comes in might be at 100% AMI. And as long as that average of those units is 80% of the area median income every year, that's what we are hoping to achieve. So.
Can I ask you a question? Did the LSA folks that wrote this, were they involved in writing the ordinance?
No.
Now, why would they not, how about all of the partners that you have listed on this paper, were they involved in the ordinance?
Which page are you referring to?
Well, it's page, it's the preceding page.
Stakeholders?
The stakeholders, yeah, it's the third page of the document, it's not page three, it's,
They were involved in several focus groups and stakeholders to develop this report, and this report was used to create the ordinance that you see before you.
I want you guys to know, I am not here tonight to give you a hard time. I want this to work, okay? But this is a big deal. I mean, this is one of the biggest things I think the county has got to deal with, and I just think that, we need to enter into this thing with all hands on deck. And I think it's great that Jamie has done, this thing, but I think it would be nice if we had some developers also
We did.
that came.
So we did, actually. When you look at the developers, we had, housing developers,
So they were involved in the ordinance.
no, they weren't involved in the ordinance, because
That's my point. I think they should be involved in the ordinance.
But they were, I mean, the suggestion from
Right.
this report is that.
The devil's in the
there'd be a
details,
binary-
Bob. Bob, the devil's in the details.
I understand that, but that's not who writes the ordinances. That's not,
All right,
That's why we have public
let's
hearings.
talk about something in the ordinance, Bob. Let's talk about the 100-foot buffer. Why should there be a 100-foot buffer?
actually, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our business at hand here, which is this particular ordinance amendment that we have in front of us this evening. This is all great discussion, and it needs to continue, and you're right, I agree with you. What I want to do, though, for our purposes this evening, is we need to vet this ordinance that's being presented in front of us, so.
That's what I'm trying to do.
I know, and then what I'd like to do is bring the focus back to what these folks are presenting to us, and let them finish what they're doing, and then we can act
Bob, he
on
said he
that.
was finished.
Are you done?
I'm done with the presentation, but I'll answer that question. So the 100-foot buffer, this goes back to the question you had earlier, Mr. Hopkins, was, we want to make sure that if these are going to go in places where there's other residential development, because it is such a high density,
Right.
that we have some separation. We have that other places in the code with RPCs, other things. And because it's a higher height, we looked at different ways of doing it. Is there a ratio with the height to the setback, that sort of thing? And that just gets complicated. It makes it difficult to plan. So we looked at the 100 feet because it would provide a vegetative buffer and separation from the property's boundaries and the development, because again, you could have this in AR1 as a permitted use. Having said that, that's why we got AECom involved, because we wanted to make sure that by imposing that 100-foot separation or buffer, we weren't impacting the ability to construct the 12 units an acre. So we we tried to look at both sides of that and make sure it worked. But to your point about the ordinance, we drafted it as staff based upon the information that was in the LSA report, the information that was in the comp plan that a whole lot of people had an opportunity to participate in. We didn't, invent something that wasn't based upon all of that stakeholder information, that report, the comp plan, and a lot of thought that went into it, and I would say a lot of verification to make sure it works. That's the other thing.
All that being said, now let me give Mr. Hopkins a chance to respond to this question, because this is specific to this ordinance that's been presented. I want to make two suggestions, and then I want to ask Mr. Hopkins if he has any suggestions about this. Two things, both of which have been touched on a little bit earlier. I think we need to give some consideration to small projects that might be achievable without water and sewer. And I also think that we should have, I'm concerned about this DART route thing, because
Agreed.
I'm telling you, that's going to be the choke point on
Yep.
this. That is going to be the choke point on this, and there should at least be some consideration given to if DART will agree to provide service for a complex, even if that service doesn't exist today, if they will commit in writing to serve that area when those apartments are available for rent, I think that should be a consideration, because otherwise you're going to be waiting for, it's a chicken or the egg. If you build it, they will come, but if you can't get permission to build it, then they're not coming.
Well, and that's
I
kind
agree
of,
completely
we
with
had
that.
that conversation, and that's why we said, we didn't want to limit it to the existing DART routes that physically exist today. We wanted to give an applicant the ability to go to DART and get a new one created. And so you could go forward with your preliminary site plan approval, and then you're still going to have to go through all state agency stuff. You're still going to have to go through DART or DelDOT, Conservation District, Fire Marshal, all that stuff. While you're doing that, get that DART route up and running so that it is up and running at the time that the final site plan is approved. So, you pull the building permits and you're on the way. and I mean, again, all this is subject to change, but we wanted to make sure, though, that we weren't going to have a project without DART being nearby. You know, that it was just a promise or a wish, and it doesn't actually.
And I get that. I mean, they have to be. I mean, they would have to agree to serve it when the apartments are there, even if there's nothing else there other than those apartments. They would, they would need to serve it. But I'm just concerned about it being a limiting factor by requiring an existing route. That's my only concern.
I agree.
Yeah, no, understood. And we played around with it too, with the distance too. I mean, that we got that number for the half a mile. Jamie worked from the federal standards just so we weren't pulling a number out of the air. But
Is it reasonable for me to be concerned that it's successful this time? That developers want to do this, developers want to invest, and we can get these people these 400 or 500 houses a year or more. I mean, that's a huge number. But I don't want this to happen. Would you mind just reading that paragraph? It's kind of like Vince touched on it. But in 2008, in 2008, there was an ordinance written. It was tuned up in, I think, 18, and it still was a failure. And I don't want this to be
I totally agree with that. That's why we had the LSA report done with the input from all those stakeholders.
I'm telling you, man, when I read this LSA report and I read this ordinance, I see two completely different things. And that's where I think we need some involvement somewhere.
That's why we're having public hearings.
Yeah, I mean, this is what this is about. There's a couple of developers out here in the room that hopefully we're going to hear from here in a minute. So that's the whole point of having the public hearing. Now's
I just want it to be successful. That's all.
No,
We all do.
and so
I want
that's
to see
what,
houses built.
yeah, no, and so that's a very
Okay.
valid point.
Yep,
Because
that's all I want.
Because when we did the 2008 SCRP, we didn't have, everybody thought it would work, and we did
Right.
talk to some developers, and they all said, yeah, this sounds great, and it didn't work. And then when we amended it, whenever that was in the meantime, the same thing happened, and like I said, we've got 30 units to date. This time, we wanted to front load it with having an expert in the field tell us what works based on their experience, based on talking. And if you look at Mr. Huggins, you talked about that. The stakeholders, they went out and talked to advocates for housing. They went out and talked to the towns that are dealing with current housing issues. They talked with housing developers, just to name a few. It was Christian Hudson, Doug Motley at Jack Lingo, because they're doing some of their own projects. Joe Mastrangelo from Carl Freeman, Boardwalk Development, Kevin Gilmore from Habitat, Ryan Homes. We had Ocean Atlantic and Milford Housing. A lot of these are people that are doing multifamily rental projects now, so they know the land costs. When you go back into the appendix of this thing, they looked at the economics of it, and that wasn't pie-in-the-sky numbers. That was based on real costs that were given to them from these folks that are involved in the industry here in Sussex County. Because it's a very valid point. We didn't want to make that same mistake twice. We wanted this to work.
Well, I'm telling you, I talked to a developer who's developed more low-income or affordable housing, I think, than anybody else, or at least one of the biggest ones in Sussex County, and he said he would not touch this ordinance with a 10-foot pole.
Well, hopefully he's here tonight and he'll tell us why.
No, he's not here tonight.
Well, do you know what his problem is with it? I mean, what's the problem? I mean, that's a great thing to
We
say,
need that
but
feedback.
if that person's not in this room telling this group that, then it doesn't mean much. I mean, okay, if that's what they said, that's great, but why aren't they here telling us about it then?
Okay, can I ask a question?
Where is that person?
Well, he probably wants to do more work in Sussex County.
Well, we want him to do more work in Sussex County, but if you got to come in and tell us. I mean, it's like you're saying, oh, this is terrible, but we're not going to tell you how to fix it because we think you might not like us. Well, if you're a developer, it's.
Do you think that do you think that you don't have a problem that no developers have like chimed in on the actual ordinance itself?
Well, not yet, because we're kind of in that process right now, and there's a few of them out here, and maybe some of them will come and say that. We're having a public hearing. I don't know what else we can do. They were consulted by the folks who put this information together. You see the list in the report. It's not like they don't know that it's going on. And if they don't care enough to be here and tell us what their concerns are, I can't help them.
So anyway,
okay? And neither can you.
I think my main concern is I'm just concerned that your density number is not high enough. I think that's like one of my main concerns. I'm concerned about consuming 50% open space. I just want it to work. I want it to work. That's
we're all
all.
on that.
As
that
long
same-
as it's
same
developed for
page.
somebody
No,
other
it
than
says
Jamie.
that it will.
As long as somebody other, I mean, somebody that's put the pencil to it and made it and says, you know something, I'm interested in doing that. I can make X percent sprawling in this, 2 to the acre, but I can really only build 1.3 to the acre out on Robinsonville Road and everywhere else. But I would be interested in doing, and I can make my whatever it is, 20%,
Well,
whatever.
and that's what, so if
But
you look-
if he can't make the same percentage, he's going to keep sprawling all out there on Robinsonville Road and everywhere else.
No, and that's a fair point. So to the 50% open space, like I said, we wanted to include that and not have it impact the 12 units an acre. That's why we did the AECOM requirements. But because those are good points. If you look at the appendix, and it starts like at page 70 of the thing, maybe 69, 68. They did go through, as I said, the actual cost of development, because they talk in here about what a developer needs to make on his return. And I'm no economist, but they look on return on cost and yield on cost, and they have like a hurdle rate they talk about, which is the minimum percentage a project must achieve to be considered financially viable. You got to get over that threshold before you start making any money. And so they look at what those yields are. There's a return on cost of 25%. And a minimum yield on cost at 7.5%. I'm not an economist. I don't know that, but that's why we paid LSA to talk to the people who are building in Sussex County to tell us what numbers financially and economically work. So anyhow, as I said, my point being, I'm not trying to take positions with anybody. We try to do this the right way this time compared to how we did in 2008 and have the data so that when we do this ordinance, subject to what everybody tells us is to improve it, it's not pie in the sky. It's based on actual data. So.
Right. Well, did you?
And you can disagree with the data, but at least we had data this time. I guess I'll put it that way.
I think the data's good.
Yeah.
I think the report, I think the analysis, whatever you call it, the evaluation is good. But I'm telling you, we got to circle back and before we close the hearing. And I would like for there to be at least some kind of a small focus group or something where some developers, at least, I would just like to have some developers that we respect coming here and say, I would jump on this. Because we don't want them just to move in this direction. We need for them to jump on this, like white on rice.
I think that should also be something that should have been addressed in the comprehensive plan, where there are specific places where we would like to see more development like this. I'm wondering about the state levels of spending. Is that considered any consideration in this at all? And that is because this will become a political talking point at some point where somebody says you just put 12 apartment buildings outside on this tiny little road, how come? And, oh, by the way, I will not be voting for this person again.
No, that's a fair point. So not directly. In other words, we didn't say state level 1, 2, or 3. And there's a reason for that, because the state levels say that they're not actual land use tools, for Sussex County to follow. So there's not a direct correlation. But there is a pretty strong indirect correlation because it's limited to the growth areas, the developing area, town center area, and the coastal area, which are, for the most part, the levels 1 and 2, So,
Are they?
yeah, pretty much, because it has to lock up. That's what the Office of State Planning Coordination looks at.
I just feel like I see a lot of level 4s coming in with developments, so.
Well, no, there's level 4s coming in with developments, but, there's, when we talk about, coastal area, for example, that's not level 4. And, well, because they just updated their maps, I'm fairly sure. There was probably some lag on that to match our comp plan, but, yeah, for that. So. No, but that's why we wanted to keep it to Sussex County land use and Sussex County comp plan for designated areas. We didn't want to defer to the state, because the other thing is the state could then go change where the levels are, and that would impact our ordinance of where we want this stuff to be built to. So they're not totally independent of each other, but it's not directly related to the state levels and state strategies. One thing it would do though is, we do have like the Henlopen TID, and that has density assumptions in it. If there was a project that came through on the Henlopen TID that was one of these because it met that category, they would have to go through the TIS process. They wouldn't be able to pay their fee and go because, it's not the same as 2 units an acre like was originally thought about. But that was always baked into the TID process anyways.
Is there any extra that goes in for somebody who does infill? If you've already got some low-income housing already in place. We have places that already have low-income housing.
Yeah, no, right.
If we could increase the density where it already is, which is already in city centers where the people can just walk to work. That would be my number one priority.
Right. No,
And that's not something we can.
because that's all in the municipality.
Well, I was going to say, this is the other thing you have to keep in mind. This is only going to be in Sussex County, and that's, here again, when you've got this requirement for water and sewer, well, we don't have county sewer all over the county. We do on the eastern side, but not so much on the western side. And most of the sewer is controlled in the municipality. So this isn't even going to kick in there.
Right.
Which is
Yeah.
why I'm thinking that we want to look for this small project exemption so that we can expand the opportunity in the county.
I think the main place we're talking about is eastern side. I mean, right now, coming here on a Thursday night, I'm in traffic that's bumper to bumper because it's everybody going home from the eastern side to the western side.
The workforce.
Yeah, the workforce.
Right.
So, yeah. So we already have low-income housing or better, more affordable housing on the western side of the county. Realistically,
You
we're talking about
you have lower priced housing, perhaps, yeah.
And one of the things
Yeah.
two things, before I forget, on the sewer side of it, we're not limiting, it's not limited to Sussex County sewer, so if one of the,
It can be anybody's
Yeah,
sewer.
yeah.
It can be anybody's sewer. I get that. I
and
get
the other thing is, that's, one of the LSA report, and I learned this from Brandy and the people talking about, it's not just being housing cost burden, it's transportation cost burden, particularly with gas prices the way they are. We want to get folks living closer to where they work so they're not having to travel.
I think that's our.
I agree.
Yeah,
I
it's a
just don't
huge
know that they
factor.
will.
So what can we do?
Well, it's hard now because there's not any units.
Well, yeah, but I had a friend, I've got kids who are trying to work at the beach, right?
Right.
So they'd get on the bus and they sit on it for 45 minutes to get to work. And the next day they said, screw it, I'll just park somewhere in town. So,
On line around 375, where you talk about bonus, the 20% bonus.
Bear with me, Mr. Hopkins. What was that line number?
wait, is it the red part that they took out that I read wrong?
Oh, is the red what comes out?
Well, the
Yes,
red's what we were
that's what comes
highlighting
out.
that's changed.
I got
So,
it.
yeah, that was
problem.
the
That
old
makes
part.
sense.
Yeah.
So it's basically coming out in the 12 units are going in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I realized before and if we could ever change one thing in state law, it's how to draft an ordinance. Because it makes it really hard for you all in the public
Yeah.
to follow. But
Well, here's another
We
thing
have to do it,
and again, this speaks to Mr. Hopkins' concern, and I agree. You do need buy-in from the people who are actually going to do this. And if it hasn't been done yet, let's make sure that a draft of this ordinance at least gets circulated to all the people that were on this list. Can we just send it out to them? I mean,
they're all people we know on the list.
yeah. Make sure that they know about it. Make sure that they've got it. Give them a chance, and then if there's anyone who wants to undertake contacting these folks and rounding them up and seeing what they think, I think it's a great idea. I think they need to see it, and I'm hoping that somehow that they've been aware of it because of their other involvement. But if just to be safe, it sure wouldn't hurt to email it to everybody and ask for a comment. This is our public hearing. There's going to be another one at County Council. So at least between now and then, get the word out and try to get the word out that the ordinance is up and get them in here to comment about it. Because you're right, if you can run it up the flagpole, but if nobody salutes,
Well, it's just like the whole idea that, look, these guys are going to be making all this money, so they need to give us this bonus. I mean, it's like, well, maybe and maybe not. I mean, it didn't work that way on the two that came before. So.
Well,
we need them. To me, this problem, it's so critical of getting these houses, built and not just rented, but we need another ordinance next week for how these people can start buying homes. Because, this report was done like 2.5 years ago, and now we're just getting the ordinance, and we got this crisis. So, my mind goes back to, when you need those, what are showing my ignorance, the breathing things that we had to build all during COVID, right? The
Mask.
the machines that we had.
Ventilators.
Ventilators, right? So I know some machine shops that got that Trump, found the money to pay these guys, bought him $1 million machine just to be able to cut the parts out for the ventilators, and he only had to do them for like 6 months, and he made money hand over fist, building them, and he still kept $1 million, and he was able to keep the $1 million machine and go on. Why? Because Trump shot the juice to it, right? Or whoever, the president or the government or whatever. But I'm not trying to punk Trump, okay? But the point is, somebody figured out that something needed steroids, and they shot the steroids to it. I think we should take the reverse approach, and that is, we need these developers to come swarming back in and saying, you know something, I will jump on this, and I personally, my company will go for 100 of these over the next 6 months. If we get that kind of response back, man, I'm with you.
Well, I think to Bob's point, what he was saying, that's the whole point behind that is get this out to the public.
Make sure it gets out to the public, make sure it gets out to the folks that you want to see it.
Yep.
Okay, and get their input, so.
And I'll say this, so, one of the, because I agree with what Mr. Hopkins is saying, the report was done in 2019. We went through the exercise of internally, having AECOM. Well, first of all, figuring out based on that report what would work. Then we had AECOM, as I said, do those drawings. Then we've also had a bunch of other initiatives, but it was time to get it going. We've been talking about this since the comp plan in 2018. Let's stop talking about it and get an ordinance out.
And you got to start someplace.
Yeah, and get the public input on so that we can get people in houses. That was important as well. And make sure that we got input from folks early on in that LSA process. So, I totally agree with you. We need to do it. We've been talking about it. Let's do it. And it's a big jump. You're right. It's making 12 units an acre permitted. And that's what I want to make sure everybody
That's
understands.
the biggest thing. The biggest thing is it's 12 units by right.
That's why this is political.
Don't pass go, don't collect $200, go directly to permit, to site plan.
Listen, I am
That's the
hung
big
up,
thing.
and maybe we can talk again tomorrow, you and me, but I am hung up on this. To achieve about this level of housing affordable to 50% AMI and below, the project would need at least 16 units per acre.
That's if you're doing just I don't know, beating a dead horse, but if you're just doing 50% or low, you're not doing 51%, then you need 16 units an acre. If you're doing 80%, and that's 80 on down to 0, you need 12 units an acre.
That don't make sense.
Randy, real quick, and this is just me asking, it doesn't have to do with ordinance. Are we also looking at things like ADUs and, alternative housing, letting people live in RVs and campsites, things like, are we looking at all of these options?
So I think that's on the radar of planning. That's certainly come up, and came up during the comp plan. I will say my office, our other initiative that's happening at the same time is the Housing Trust Fund was also just rolled out at the beginning of April, which we are hoping to address the homeownership components of the elements of this report. So we're offering direct homeownership assistance with that fund for down payment closing, as well as offering a developer grant program for those that are building affordable housing. So those are our two these are two pretty big lifts for our office and staff of 6, and so we're taking that on right now. But there certainly are other,
I just look
those
at
issues have certainly come up, and certainly homelessness is another one, and it's an issue we would like to address for sure.
Yeah, I just think that would be one way to help this problem without having to give away the farm to all the developers and get a whole bunch of people who are going to have signs outside here. So
It's probably all the above, really, to some degree.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but, okay.
all right.
Let's see if there's anyone here that has an interest in this ordinance.
Still a week.
Maybe go through 2 bottles of water. Holy smoke.
I told you I was going to put you through it.
All right. And rather than for or against, I don't think that really applies so much as just having an interest. So if there's anyone who would like to speak, now's the time.
We have a bearded man with
Yeah.
his hand up.
And Mr. Hudson, before you make your comments, please let me extend to you on behalf of the entire Planning and Zoning Commission and offices, our condolences on the passing of your grandfather. He was a great man and will be sorely missed by everyone.
Yes.